if you're going to be an entrepreneur, start earlier, because in your 20s, it's just about figuring things out and you need very little. The older you get, the more responsibilities and all of that. So I would have just said start early.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have a founder that has done it multiple times. There's going to be quite a bit of lessons learned that we're going to be discussing. In quite this story. We're going to be talking about building, scaling, financing, you name it. Also starting companies with family members. Transitioning from different fields. Segments. A lot of really good stuff. Brace yourself for a very inspiring conversation. Without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, David Metz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
So originally born and raised in Long Island, New York. Give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up for you?
Awesome. Grew up, parents still together, still alive, knock on wood. Older brother, younger brother. My parents were entrepreneurs themselves. They owned an irrigation business. So I definitely grew up not knowing what entrepreneurial was, but knowing the work that it took to get them where they got to. So I was kind of always steeped in what entrepreneurialism meant and is.
So are entrepreneurs born or made?
It's a good question. Probably a little bit of both. I think risk tolerance is not something that's learned. You either have it or you don't, and you certainly need it to be an entrepreneur. Also what it takes, right? Like my parents sacrificed a ton, right? I saw, there were Christmases where we didn't get Christmas presents because it was a choice whether to, keep somebody on payroll or let them go, right? So seeing those hard decisions, it became normal for me. Like I thought that is how everyone, not until I grew up, and I grew up in a pretty blue collar town. I never knew doctors or lawyers or exec that didn't exist where I lived. Right. So, that was the entrepreneurialism was the only way that I knew. So definitely became more normal to me, where for most people, the risks that most entrepreneurs take seemed crazy, especially when you look at the odds, like 9 out of 10 startups fail and all of that.
Now, for you, obviously, you were quite competitive. You played lacrosse, and that really got you through college and all of that. I guess that competitiveness, how do you think that has served you, also when it comes to ambition and having your own projects?
I am 48 now, so my athletic career is way behind me. The closest thing that I get to those highs of wins is when you close a deal or something big happens to the company, right? It's pretty similar. But if you ask me if I could go back to 19-year-old David when I was playing Division I lacrosse, would I rather be in the locker room or on the playing field? It's probably the locker room. You know what I mean? That team camaraderie. And having a team here at Prizeout is the closest thing to having that locker room, having a goal and achieving something together and everyone doing their job. So, and also it helps to be competitive, right? Because you want to win. But, I've tried to replicate my experience in athletics here at the company, right? And there's a lot of things that are similar to that experience.
And we'll talk about the company in just a little bit, but obviously there's a couple of things, they are leading into it. You've started a few companies. So right out of college, you went to Wall Street, you got your chops there, and then eventually you started your first business. So walk us through what were the sequence of events there until you were like, you know what, I'm gonna test this thing out of launching my own thing.
Yeah, I've always done entrepreneurial things. When I was in college, I worked for a financial advisory firm, and this was at like 99, 2000 when stock market was going crazy. And I was kind of doing stock market challenges and doing well. And I started talking to some of the financial advisors, and they're like, wow, you're really doing well. So I somehow convinced them, being a 19-year-old, to give them give me their money in the form of give me access to your Ameritrade account, and I would trade it for them, and they would give me 20% of their profits. And I was managing in college about 20 of those Ameritrade accounts. Nothing of that is legal. I'm sure it goes against like every SEC law. But I did quite well. And from there, not having any experience whatsoever, I wanted to learn properly how to be a trader. But that was my first kind of entrepreneurial thing. Number one, I had to sell them, right? Convince a 19-year-old to give me access to your Ameritrade, right? I came up, this is before I knew what 2 and 20 in the hedge fund world was. So the 20% was by accident. And I had to execute, right? And when things, when I didn't have a good trade and they're like, what happened? Like I had to have tough conversations, right? So that was my first kind of, official startup. I didn't have an LLC or anything like that. But I was doing a sophisticated thing that I was just kind of finding my way into. So that was really my first. And then post working on Wall Street, I had an idea for online classifieds. I'm sure you remember this, but in the mid 2000s, Craigslist was everything. You want to buy an apartment, you want to sell your couch, you want to go on a date. Literally, it was taking the newspaper model and bringing it online. I don't know if you've been on Craigslist.
Oh yeah.
It has not changed. It is literally the same thing. So anyway, I took that model and I just added like a social element to it, where there was reviews and things like that, because if someone said they were going to buy your couch, you trusted them that they were going to come in your apartment and not kill you, right? So that was called Flugpo. I think at our height, we had like over 1.5 million listings, predominantly in the New York area. And then unfortunately, that I started in 06, 08 happened, right? And then like funding and everything like that happened. So we exited at a nominal amount, but it was my first real taste of being an entrepreneurial. And then once I had that, it was never looking back. I could never go back and work for a company again.
I mean, I think that at the end of the day, an outcome where you're able to get it to the finish line, it's still an outcome, and there's still like great lessons, to take away with you. I guess in this case, as you were mentioning, an acqui-hire. Now, an acqui-hire, how should people, especially all the founders that are listening now, how should people think about acqui-hires?
Yeah, it takes on different meanings, I think, throughout the decades, because acqui-hires all the rage right now. But the acqui-hires that are happening now are for real money, because a lot of it is built around AI, right? Because AI is such a new industry. There's not much talent. Nobody went to school for AI, right? Most of it is self-learned. So back then, it was more for like the assets and people, right? And then you're usually not keeping everyone. Nowadays, acqui-hires can be really, really profitable, because the skill set that the people have, and specifically towards AI, are really valuable. There's companies getting bought by $200-300 million in acqui-hires, right? Because that talent's real. So it's definitely changed from then than it is today.
So after that, you went at it with your brother. So you guys started a board game, and you sold like 30,000 units or so. I mean, it was heading in the right direction. But I mean, you saw the business with your parents, their irrigation system that they own in Long Island, and the experience, with your brother, perhaps, like you got a different type of taste, or what did you get from that? I mean, how was that for you guys?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we started it was we were both kind of not doing anything. So let's do something together, right? And then as it grew and got more and more success, it just becomes more about the future, the money and things like that. And it came to a point where it's like, what do I value more? The potential or my relationship with my family? And in this case, I chose my family. People always say never go into business with family. And like, you always think that, oh, they're talking about somebody else, not me. And it's neither negative about family members. It's just like, it's two different worlds, right? And honestly, my parents had a company together, and there were a lot of, arguments at the dinner table and all of that, right? Like when you come home, you want to talk about other things, not work, right? Home should be your sanctuary, right? You should leave work outside of it, right? Anytime you kind of invite family members in it, the waters just get muddied, right? So, that was a lesson that I learned. And I think both me and my brother learned that lesson. So we both decided like it's better to just kind of move on from it and take the experience, which was incredible. There's, thousands of people's homes right now that have our board game, and that's pretty cool. And certainly check something off our bucket list.
Now, after this one, the next one, it was
Yeah.
FleetWit. Now, with
Yeah.
FleetWit, there you guys had basically like a trivia app, and essentially you guys raised some money. You were doing about $1 million a month, and then all of a sudden you woke up a giant, Warner Brothers, and came in knocking. And obviously that changed everything, but also it was a really nice immediate step, for you to end up landing, with what you're doing now with Prizeout. So walk us through what happened there.
Yeah, so we were having a lot of success. Essentially, the premise was pretty simple. You could challenge friends or strangers in online trivia through an app, but the catch was that you would wager money, right? So it was skill-based gaming, and the skill was how much do you know? And there were hundreds of categories, everything from sports to history. But one of our most popular categories were things like Harry Potter, right, or Friends, right? So we'd ask questions from the movies and TV show, and is super duper popular and was one of the biggest levers of growth. And then one day we got an email from Warner Brothers saying, cease and desist, you're using intellectual property. Um, and that was kind of like, whoa, right? So when we had to turn off those categories, our CAC started to increase significantly. So we had to start asking questions. But what was interesting is one of the things that happened while I had that app was people would win money and they needed a way to withdraw their earnings, and they would do it through digital gift cards. And on the same side, I was spending a ton of money on Facebook acquiring users. But over time, I kind of realized it's like, wait a second, every time someone wins money and they withdraw their money to Nike gift card or to Olive Garden or whatever it might be, those companies were essentially acquiring a user. So I thought there was a huge opportunity there. So I went to my board and I said, don't kill me, but we're going to close down FleetWit and we're going to start this new company focused on gift cards and monetizing that process. And they were incredibly supportive. And I took all of my investor equity percentage and I gave them the same exact amount, even though legal said you don't have to do that, right? You're not legally obligated, but that's not who I am and that's not what I believe. So then we started Prizeout, and that was about 6 years ago, and it's kind of been taken off from that point on. Obviously, nothing is up and to the right. There's a lot of like zigzags along the way, but we're in a great position as a company right now.
So for the people that are listening to get it, what ended up being Prizeout? What's the business model there? How do you guys make money?
Yeah, so what we started out as a withdrawal option for gaming. So if you win $100, it could be on something like a DraftKings or whatever, like you won money. Typically, there's a couple of ways to withdraw money: PayPal, ACH. We offered another way for them to withdraw their money, and we allowed them to withdraw it through digital gift cards. The catch was, if they withdrew it to digital gift cards, they would get a bonus. So if you won $100, you might get $110 to Nike or $120 to Cheesecake Factory. So you're getting more money. And then we would also pay our partners a rev share. So typically when people withdraw money through PayPal or something, PayPal charges fees. We would pay them a rev share. So they would turn what is usually a cost center into a profit center. And for some of our partners, that's meant millions of dollars of incremental revenue. And that eventually led to us partnering with financial institutions and running their entire rewards programs where we are today. So many steps from that point to there, but that's kind of the evolution of it.
Now, one thing that is pretty interesting here is, you guys have raised about $64 million.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you're not a big fan of raising from VCs. So I'd like to hear how has been the journey of raising the money and then the whole VC thing. Walk us through that too.
Yeah, it's funny. you know, I'm in a position now where a lot of young founders reach out for advice. And I just remember being on the other side of that, right? And everyone asks, like, can I get help with fundraising, right? Everyone thinks it's a science. Like, tell me the secret, right? What's the silver bullet? And there is none, right? I've got stories of, flying to an investor and promising money and being left at the airport and having to fly home that, I went into debt on credit card to even make that flight, right? There are millions of those stories, right? Um, I think, it's not that I don't like VCs. I think a lot of VCs and not all VCs are run by people that have theoretical knowledge, right? And especially when you're early in your entrepreneurial journey, you really need somebody that's felt the pain that you have, right? So I really have preferred to raise money from founders. Obviously, in this day and age, you have people that have sold companies for lots of money and of high net worth. You've got family offices, right? So if it was 20 years ago, you really didn't have many places to go other than VCs. But in terms of having somebody that has the empathy of the entrepreneurial journey, I just prefer to raise from ex-founders. Just it served me well, especially when it's been the real hard times as well.
So if you are not raising like the typical, I mean, what people call typical, right, which is from VCs, and you're thinking about the life cycles of the business, how the life cycles, let's say, mature every 18 to 24 months, and then how you're putting in parallel the financing cycles to be able to accommodate and put that in parallel to support whatever the needs are of the company are, and perhaps also the value add that these people bring, whether it's know-how or network. How did you guys think about that as you were raising that 64 million?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In our last round, our Series C, we actually was led by 21 credit unions, right? Some of these credit unions are 30 billion in assets, pretty massive, right? We in parallel partner with credit unions, right? So by taking money from your partners, you're not just getting capital, you're also getting partners, right? So you're kind of killing two birds with one raise, right? Yes, venture capital can intro you and things like that, but unless you have skin in the game, so if you're allowing your partners to invest, of course they're going to go live with your products. Of course they're going to use that, right? So I've preferred that method. Now, obviously not everyone can do that. Different models require different funding and things like that. And then we're at a point where we're about to reach profitability, which is obviously where you want to go, where you can control your own destiny, right? Because you never know what happens, right? Like I always say, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right? And you may think, everyone, when they ask me about how much money should I raise, I said, I don't know what you're raising, but double it, right? It's better to have it in the bank and not need it than put yourself in a situation where you need it. Then you're going to, unfortunately, lose leverage, and then that's going to be reflected in the terms and everything else, and you're going to be at a huge disadvantage, right? So raise as much money as you can, but the only true way to kind of never put yourself in that situation is just to get profitable as quickly as possible.
And then when it comes to, for example, investors, I mean, you were talking about the fact that you like to raise from people that have been there before, behind the trenches, that really understand perhaps the journey that you're going through. When we're thinking about value, what does value look like when you're extracting that from investors?
Two things. One is intros, right? Once somebody writes a check, they now have an inherent motivation to help, right? And usually, if someone's writing big checks, they have a significant network, right? So leveraging that network, you have to be proactive on it. Nobody knows what problems you have, or, it's so funny. A lot of times when I talk to them, you just have a conversation like, oh, I know the CEO there. I'll make an intro, right? But you have to be proactive. And the other is advice, right? Because as a CEO, I really have two jobs. One is internally with employees, but one is externally with the board and investors and all of that, right? Sometimes you feel like on an island, but when you sit down, if your investors are also fellow entrepreneurs, they can tell you stories, right? I've had investors that have sold companies for massive amounts of sums, and I won't tell the company, but this one story was they were in a real bad situation. They had to go to a bank, right, for a loan, and they were putting their houses, right? And the person at the bank said, okay, come back tomorrow, but bring your wives, right? And they brought their wives, right? And the four of them were sitting there in front of the bank, and the bank person said, guys, because the two guys were the founders, I need you to leave the room. And then they went to the wives and they said, don't do this. You are going to lose your house, right? And then the wives said, you know what? We are going to do this. 3 years later, sold the company, massive amount, right? But that's a crazy story, right? And when you just meet somebody for the first time and they have money, you just assume it was an easy path. But when they tell you that stories, you're like, wow, I'm not alone, right? I'm not the only one, right? And not everyone has those stories, right? If you, went to, Yale and then got your Harvard MBA and then your first job worked for a VC and now you're a partner, right? You didn't get those experiences, right? You don't really know the risk that these entrepreneurs. So you can fake it and you could read stories and things like that. But unless you've really lived it, and for me, that's been incredibly valuable.
So obviously, the investors that you bring to the table, the customers, the like you were saying, even the employees, no? I mean, the 40 employees that you guys have. I mean, they're at the end of the day, they're all betting on the future, on what's possible, on the vision. So if you were to go to sleep tonight, David, and you wake up in a world where the vision of Prizeout is fully realized, what does that world look like?
It's a good question. When it doesn't need me anymore, I always describe where we are as like, it's like a 3-year-old, right? And you have a 3-year-old child and it climbed on top of the piano and it started playing Mozart. And you're like, oh my gosh, like we have a virtuoso, right? We have this amazing child, right? But the child still needs its diaper change. It still needs to be fed. It still needs to be kept alive, right? So I think we're leaving that stage. I think that one day when I get out of the subway and I'm walking to work and it's like, you know what? Doesn't need me anymore, right? If I were not here today, the company would just go on. I think that's it. And then the ultimate kind of selfish goal, and I've always kind of had this daydream, is like, I don't know, let's say we got acquired and 5 years later, all of the ex-employees got together, like rented out a bar or something. And then you found out what everyone's doing. This person's the head of this. This person started their own company, right? And Prizeout was the springboard that launched all of these people to do these great things. Like that would be the ultimate kind of dream of mine, right? That would be pretty awesome.
So we're talking about the future here. I want to talk about the past, but doing so with a lens of reflection. No, I mean, you've been now an entrepreneur for quite some time. You've had all these different experiences, different shapes, different forms. Let's say I'm able to bring you back in time, to that moment where maybe you were coming out of college, you were starting to have your ideas, and you're able to stop that younger self, that younger David. And let's assume that younger David listened, okay? Because the younger selves, they tend to be a little more rebel. But let's say you're able to stop that younger self and give that younger David one piece of advice before launching a company. What would that be and why, given what you know now?
So there's a saying by Oscar Wilde, or it might be Mark Twain, but doesn't matter. It's, I'm not young enough to know everything, right? Yes, if I came back to the future, 21-year-old David, he would have to listen to it, right? That's the hardest part, right? Because, and knowing who I am, unless I had experienced it, right? For me, the best way learning has always been to experiencing. So like, if I was just told, it would be hard for me. But if I were to give one specific lesson, I would have said start earlier, right? If you're going to be an entrepreneur, start earlier because, in your 20s, it's just about figuring things out and you need very little. You need a futon and ramen to survive, right? The older you get, the more responsibilities and all of that. So I would have just said start earlier, right? But that's a hard thing to do, right? Because, your parents want you to get a job and they want you to live a risk-free life, right? But yeah, I think if there was one piece of advice, it would be just do it earlier.
I love that. David, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out, say hi, learn more about Prizeout, what is the best way for them to do so?
Just email david@prizeout.com.
Easy
Please
enough.
email.
Easy enough. Well, David, thank you so much for being on the Deal Maker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thank you.